But how do people know you know what you're doing? It's not by, to your point, regurgitating stats. It's about interpreting information and making it functional to the benefit of the audience that you're speaking to. Being trusted is more important than it ever was. Being authentic is more important than it ever was. And we have to keep that in mind as experts and appear as trustworthy, appear as authentic, appear as helpful. And that in itself has become a differentiator.
Welcome to the Intangible Brand, where we explore the connection between employee experience and client experience and the hidden forces that make brands stick. I'm Jerry Gennaria, joined as always by my co-host, Carl Winstead. Today, we're excited to welcome Susan Baier. Susan's the founder and CEO of Audience Audit, and she's built her career at the intersection of research and strategy. She's also a professional speaker and marketing strategist, helping thought leaders build ROI and reputation through meaningful research. We're looking forward to digging into how audience research could reshape the way firms think about growth and client relationships. So, Susan, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, Susan, awesome to meet you. It's great to have you here. Thank you for joining us from Arizona, correct?
Yep.
So,
Beautiful Arizona, where
there,
it's no longer hitting 100 every day.
all right, all right. Well, as Jerry said, welcome to the show. And as he mentioned, you've built a career, and as he said, at this intersection of research and strategy, and that's
Mhm.
kind of interesting. So I'd love to know, sort of, kind of what first drew you into this work, and then what led you to start Audience Audit.
Desperation on both counts, I would say. Um, with respect to the work around research, I think that, I spent a lot of time. I've worked client side and agency side for 45 years, I guess now almost. And, the whole let's sit around the table and decide what our customers want or what our prospects are thinking or, what just kind of drove me crazy. It's just because it's totally driven by the guts of whoever happens to be in the room or around that table that day. Um, and early in my career, I was lucky to experience some really great research. I was working at a consumer products company, big CPG company, and they had a budget to do research. And I'd done research in grad school and afterwards. And I just had the opportunity to see what it's like to make decisions based on research instead of your gut and the outcome as a result. And so, I started incorporating that type of thing in my work. And then in 2009, I was working at an agency here in Tempe with Jay Bayer, actually, and the recession hit,
Mm.
and it was time for me to go. And at that point, I'd worked for a couple big, massive Fortune 100 firms, and I just decided it was time to go full-time working for myself. So that's why I started Audience Audit. I wanted to keep doing this kind of work, and I wanted to be able to do it with the clients that I wanted to work with.
Yeah. So that's interesting about the idea of really understanding your audience and how much firms just kind of shoot from the hip.
Mhm.
So I think a lot of firms think or say that they know their audience. I know in my experience, we don't need to talk to our customers. Our salespeople talk to them all the time. We know them. So in your experience, how accurate is that usually?
We work with experts at Audience Audit. That's our client base. So obviously, you know something about your audience, or you wouldn't have a successful business. You wouldn't have been doing this for as long as you have been. Um, but I also think that there are things our audience won't tell us directly if they know we know who they are.
Yeah.
And I think part of the human condition is just to put our own perceptions and biases and assumptions into play. That's how we get through the world. And so I think that, we don't know our audience as well as we might. And I think actually the more interesting question to me is, does our audience know us? And
Hmm.
what do they know about us? And how are we deciding what to tell them about us. And if we don't know what they care about, what they're looking for, what's a priority for them, we have very little hope, I think. It's a shot in the dark to think that our messaging, our communications, our even with clients, our interactions with clients are going to really hit the bullseye with them because we just have assumed that what we like to talk about is what they're interested in hearing.
Right.
And you and I both know that that's not always the case. So I think I don't think there are very many situations in which having real data that people can provide honestly, and then looking at that and interpreting it isn't of value in how we approach things.
Huh.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk just a minute about leaders and leadership because I think it's probably not a surprise that a lot of times us leaders do have misconceptions. And you've probably found that that sometimes leaders may have misconceptions a lot of times maybe about research itself. I'm just, curious, like what do you think is the thing that maybe sometimes we expect as leaders that we're going to get from research that it really can't give us?
Validation.
Mm,
I think that, a lot of people who've been doing what they do for a long time or experts have a vision of the world, have a vision of how things work, have a vision of the challenges that people face when they're considering making a purchase in their category. And so they come to research looking for numbers to prove that they're right. And sometimes research will do that for you. But I think that that's the wrong way to approach research. Research at its core is a scientific process.
mm,
And the way a scientific process works is you develop a hypothesis and you test it and you try to prove it wrong, and if you can't prove it wrong, then it's right. Gravity's never been proven right. It's just repeatedly been proven wrong. So we believe it to be right. But someday, maybe it will be. You never know. But I think that a lot of folks come in looking for research to affirmatively document that they are right. When in fact, there's so much more opportunity to going in and saying, what if I'm wrong? How
mm,
do what is the world looking like if I'm not correct? And that's how I like to approach research. If you do it the other way, I mean, for one thing, you're shortchanging yourself because you're heading into this with blinders on.
Mm.
You're not going to find new, exciting, helpful insights because you're not asking the right questions to uncover those. And at its best, research is a box of chocolates. You don't really know what you're going to get. And there's going to be some stuff in there that's familiar and comfortable and affirming. But I think that the best research combines those types of findings with things that surprise you and things that move you in new directions and better directions and break down some of the assumptions that can sort of get encrusted when you've been doing a certain type of work with a certain type of audience for a long time.
okay. Yeah.
Interesting. So while we're talking about leaders who control the purse strings,
Mhm.
one of the things that I know I've experienced in my career is either a reluctance to spend money or in an effort to save money will dispense with the research. Since, as you pointed out, we've been doing okay and we kind of know who our audience is. So, what do you say to the leaders that need to open those purse strings up about the value of the investment?
I think that one of the things that is consistently the most surprising in the research we do, and as you know, Jerry, we do research B2B, B2C across a huge number of categories, and have been doing that for 20 years. Um, and one of the most surprising things consistently is that our audience doesn't always know the information we assume they know. We have
Huh.
gathered a lot of insight about this and what's important and what matters and what impacts your total cost of ownership or whatever. And our audience doesn't always know those things, but we sort of assume that they do because we know them. Um, I had a, I did a research study with a company that provided consumer goods. They were selling at retail. They were very high end, sort of luxury. That was the positioning of the company. And we did a big study with folks on where they among other things, where they bought products that they considered in that category to be that sort of luxury high-end tier. Um, Guess what the number one answer was?
I don't know.
Walmart.
Mm,
Oh.
Because Walmart is a place everybody is. I mean, this was when Amazon was sort of just getting started, so
Mhm.
Amazon wasn't as big as it is now, but you'd see Amazon now at the top of that list. It's just where everybody is. You're there for other stuff. So
Right.
you just come across stuff, right? So it's going
Yeah.
to show up very often. Well, the CEO was pissed. He was like, that is absolutely not accurate. The stuff you can buy at Walmart is nothing like our stuff.
mm,
And I had to tell him, they don't know that.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know
Good
that,
point. Yeah.
mhm,
but they don't you have not delineated that difference to them in a way that they see you as being a tier above what you can get at Walmart.
mm,
So even though that's intrinsic to how he runs the company and the company's, the brand efforts that they're making, there was a big percentage of folks that was really comparing this very high-end product to something that they could pick up at Walmart, which is not what they wanted for the brand. So
Mm.
I just think that there's times when we need to step back. It's very difficult to break our own assumptions by
Mhm.
ourselves. Usually we have to have some kind of an experience that hits us in the face and goes, wow, was I wrong about that?
Yeah.
mhm,
Mm. And so even doing research yourself can be a problem because you just don't think to ask questions that you don't think to ask. Like you sort of need you just need somebody else to try to break down some of the assumptions that you have sometimes. And so research is a good way to do that, to hear from your audience in a way that you might not think to explore topics.
Yeah, I
mm,
think there's a lesson in there. Brand marketers spend all of their time thinking about their brand, and it becomes
Mhm.
really easy to believe that everybody else does too. And the reality is that 99.9999% of the time, nobody is thinking about your brand.
Yeah.
And even more so in professional services, unless you happen to be working on a project or something together. And even then, they're probably not thinking about you nearly as much as they're thinking about whether or not they're getting their kids to school on time.
Yeah, or thinking about your brand the way you think that they are. I mean,
Right.
I did research years ago for a family-owned Mexican food chain, local, and all of their advertising was around the fact that it'd been founded by their grandparents, and they'd, been there for 100 years and, still serving food from the family farm. But when you do the research, the vast majority of people, that's way down the priority list in terms
Hmm.
of where they're choosing to eat. I mean,
Right.
there are some that for whom that is more important, but for most of them, that's just not even on the radar in their consideration set. But that was a difficult pill to swallow for the family members running that business because it's so important to them. So I think this is not something that we can help doing,
Right.
and it's not something that we're bad marketers for doing. It's just, again, part of how the brain works. Um, and so we need to push ourselves to think differently. And I think the best leaders, that's what they're doing all the time. Internally and with external efforts like marketing and stuff like that, they're trying to push back on themselves. They're good at asking questions and listening to different perspectives on that. So research is just another way to do that.
Right.
It's interesting, Jerry, as designers, I think a lot of times we get so attached or so close to what we're designing, and we're convinced that everybody sees exactly what we've seen,
Hmm.
right? Oh, absolutely. This was our intent or this is what we thought about. And I am always amazed at how many times people will go, well, I didn't see that.
Mhm.
Right.
Really? Really? I thought you
Yeah,
should.
and I think that, AI is such an interesting technology because one of the things it's very good at is helping you understand what you've missed. It's good
Mm.
at
Mhm.
finding the holes. And even in our process, when we are developing questions around attitudes that people have about a specific category or whatever, we'll go through that process ourselves. And then we'll sort of take that list of attitudes we want to ask about, perspectives that we want to test, and we'll throw it into AI and say, for this audience, for this situation, is there anything we're missing that is out there that we should be asking about. And, um, it's true that we are to some extent throwing spaghetti at the wall, but you want to make sure that you've got the right spaghetti. That you've
Right. Yeah.
got all the options available there for people to see themselves as having answer options in a survey that represent them really
Yeah.
well. So, trying to figure out what you're missing is a big part of what we do every day.
Well,
Yeah.
and it's interesting, Carl. You talked about the designer having a lens into the thought process behind the decisions that they made, and the consumer, or the user of a building, for example, not really resonating with that. But you can actually take that the opposite way, and this is where I think AI, at least today, can't help us. And so a little anecdote, I was recently in Boston, and I had the opportunity to stay at a hotel that bills itself as a luxury hotel. And it's one of these properties that is, it's built around a theme. There's a key theme that goes back to the history of the building, and it's very, very cleverly done. And everything
Mhm.
about that is you can see the thinking process behind that. But somewhere along the line, whoever it is that controlled the dollars and cents started making decisions. And so you're in a property that's charging more than the usual, billing itself as a luxury property. You go in the restroom in the room, and something as simple as the toilet doesn't have soft closed seats. So in the middle of the night, the seats going, smack. Or the shower is just a little bit smaller than what you really expect out of that type of a hotel. And these are decisions that were undoubtedly made for very
Mhm.
important financial reasons. So, as we say, it has to pencil, but it has to pencil in a way that doesn't undermine, right? If I'm staying at the Quality Inn, I don't expect necessarily that I'm going to get, soft closed toilets, but you kind of expect it in a luxury place. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, and that expectation may differ by different types of customers you have. What does luxury mean to you? How do you see it reflected? What are the indicators that validate your decision to buy? So we know what yours is, Jerry. It's the toilet seat in the shower. Uh, for others, it may be the beds, it may
right,
be the food, it may be the neighborhood and what's within walking distance. It may be who's stayed there in the
Yeah.
past. Like, I think that it's really important to recognize that a lot of these decisions are very sort of individualized, and they may not map very well to an aggregate group. And
mm,
you could say everybody favors this over that, which is,
Yeah.
one of the challenges I see in marketing is we tend to sort of assume that everybody feels the same way about things
right.
in our audience.
Or
Yeah.
everybody from a certain generation does. One of
Yeah,
my pet
right.
peeves.
It's demographic or that it's based on that. And, that's just, I've got 20 years of research to prove that that's not true.
Right,
Yeah.
In virtually any category you can imagine, it's just not how it works. And we
right.
know that in real life,
Yeah.
but we forget about it when we're on the marketing side, the brand side, trying to make decisions because it's a lot easier to treat everybody as if they're the same
Right.
from a
Well, that is something that I think you at Audience Audit, I think you do work with that. I mean, you realize that attitudes will segment the way you see something, and that does differ, though. If I'm right, that does differ from a traditional way of looking at demographics or firmographic ways, right? That people tend to look. Um, can you talk
market.
about that maybe just a little bit?
Yeah, it's very different. I mean, as I said, we know that people think differently. You can line up, either of you, a whole bunch of your friends who make about the same money that you do, have the same sort of family makeup maybe that you do, and ask each of them what their ideal dream vacation would be, and people are going to say different things
Mhm.
because it's not about the money. It's not about, it's about what's your personal preference. And we know people who have the same budget and some who spend a way more on tech or shoes or clothes than everybody else. Personal priorities and preferences make a real difference. And we've done hundreds and hundreds of studies where we are understanding how groups within an audience feel about a topic, a category, what's important in a vendor, how they feel about their own organization's capabilities when it comes to marketing or manufacturing or whatever.
Mhm.
Um, and they have nothing to do with demographics. They have nothing to do with how big the firm is, what their budget is, how many people they have on a team. Companies have opinions and perspectives just like people do because there's people in those companies making those decisions.
Right.
And I think that, when we do this research and say, look what was revealed in terms of the different groups that we've got here. I just did a presentation this morning to a brand that has some very different opinions and perspectives among their core audience about what's of value with the brand and why they patronize it. And the vast majority of the time, probably 95% of the time, there is no correlation to any sort of profile information, whether
Mm.
it's B2B or B2C, that differentiates them. What differentiates them is very clear, and you can see in their behavior the attitudes that are driving them. Once you know what they are, you can be like, oh, that's why they do that. But it rarely has anything to do with how much money you make or what kind of a
Mm.
car you drive or any of those kinds of things. So for me, I've been a marketer, a strategist for many years, and to me, that's why people connect. Nobody wants an email that says "Hello, woman, 25 to 49." That's not going to be compelling, because it's not why you make decisions. And I think that it's much more compelling to say, look, we really do understand you. And we do understand that you're different from other people in that this is a real priority for you. This is a real challenge for you. You really struggle with this, or you feel this particular way, or you have this assumption. And man, it's so much better to meet people where they really are in terms of their perspective on things to get them to feel like you're worth listening to, which is more important today than it's ever been.
Now, let's just be clear. If
Yeah.
I got an email that said, "Dear male under 49," I would be ecstatic.
You would be ecstatic. I understand that. There would be some preference there. I can understand that. But ultimately, we have to break things down into what's driving people, what
Right.
motivates them or unmotivates them. And that's not gonna show up on paper.
Yeah.
It's between the ears.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, can you help make that a little bit more tangible? Maybe you have an example of where segmentation or other kinds of research, revealed something that fundamentally changed the strategy for a client.
Yeah. Do you want a end client story or do you want a story about agencies?
And let's go end client.
Okay. So we did work years ago for Tufts University
Hmm.
outside of Boston for their alumni group that was planning on putting on an event for alumni with an eye to increasing engagement, improving relevance, and ultimately generating donations from alumni to the university. And we found when we did this research a whole set of different ideas about what engagement and being an alumnus meant to people and what they wanted out of it. So we had one group that was just very much like rah rah toughs. They loved their experience at the school. They wore their hoodie on the weekends when they were washing their car. They loved to show up at the football games or squash games or whatever was going on. And that was their, big point of engagement. But not everybody was like that. One of their groups really felt as if they were experts. They'd achieved expertise in their own field with a lot of experience. And what they really wanted out of their alumni engagement with the university was the opportunity to basically give back to Tufts and advise them based on their expertise about where they thought the university should be going. And you know, ultimately, the university decided to do an event specifically for that group that was very much like, I want to be engaged with senior leadership about what's happening at Tufts, and I want to contribute to that decision making. So they put on this event specifically for those folks. They positioned it that way as sort of a forum for experts. Um, and they structured it was a paid 3-day weekend. People paid to attend
Hmm.
and spend 3 days in all kinds of sessions. One of the opening sessions was the leadership of the university presenting the university's 5-year plan that was then in development. and basically talking about that, immediately followed by a cocktail party where they wandered around and let people ask them questions or provide feedback and said, "What did you
Mm.
think? What did you," whatever. And then there were other opportunities like that throughout the weekend. And it was incredibly successful for them. They sold out. They did it the next year and sold out even more. Overwhelmingly, people were happy with the event, and the donations that they got from that group of alumni versus ones that had not attended was like double. It was
Oh, wow.
dramatically increased because they read the room and then they invited the people who wanted to be in that room in that way. So if you sat next to somebody at the football game, it was because, that person happened to be the provost of the university and you wanted to have a chat about where the school was going. It
Yeah.
wasn't about like have another, Bloody Mary from the cooler. Um, and so that really changed things for them. And they
Mm.
really just understood something differently and now do events and activities for various groups within their alumni group. But they don't assume that everybody's looking for the same type of engagement with the university. And they don't measure their satisfaction with their alumni experience the same way.
That's interesting, because what they were doing or what you were doing was really, at the end of the day, basically helping build relationships as opposed to just this, I'm showing you this product, right? And I
That's
think, it's interesting because I think a lot of times we can think of audience research as being something very traditional that supports like advertising that just, yeah, here's the product, here's the thing, we've researched it, we've asked people, and here it is.
Yep.
And yet the world that I'm in and Jerry's in and a lot of our other listeners are in with AEC, it's a professional services deal, and so at that point, your product is sort of a piece, but it's really about the client relationship. That's the biggest piece. Um, and so it might be interesting to talk a little bit about maybe how audience research can change the way that firms can think about building and sustaining those relationships. Because at the end of the day, like to the point of the story you just did, the relationship is what really moved the needle.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point. I think a lot of clients are surprised when we go through the research with them, and they're obviously very interested in talking about how they can use that for identifying ideal prospects and nurturing them, and getting them to convert.
Mhm,
And then I'll talk about how they can use the research to deepen relationships with their existing customers
mhm,
um, by going and showing those customers or clients what you found in your research and whether it surprised you and is it interesting, and talking to each of those
mhm,
clients and saying, do you see yourself in this landscape? We identified these various types of folks who prioritize these very types of things and think about things a little differently. Which one sounds most like you? Is there something that we need to understand about you that would help us serve you better? And that just it first of all, it builds a lot of credibility because investing in understanding them is uniformly appealing to clients and to prospects and to team members, frankly. It suggests something about you that differentiates you from maybe the other guys out there.
sure.
But it also means you really do care about understanding them and trying to deliver as best you can on the things that they're struggling with and that you're trying to help with. So I do think, I mean, I always encourage clients to take what they've learned and turn the table around and say, what can we do for our existing clients and customers
Mhm,
to show them and demonstrate to them that we understand them and want to understand them more deeply than maybe they've thought that we cared about, and
right.
that's important to us. Because I'm with you, relationships really matter, and buyers have relationships with brands now
Mhm,
in a way that they didn't used to.
yep,
It's important. They wanna know, like, okay, what are your social causes that you're supporting as a brand? How is your leadership performing in public, and does that shed good light on you as a brand? Can I trust you as a brand? We know now, thanks to Edison research, that 59% of buyers think that business leaders are lying to them intentionally to manipulate them into buying something. We do not have a baseline of sort of lack of trust or moderate trust anymore. The
mhm.
baseline is distrust.
Interesting.
And the way to build trust is to be transparent and to be vulnerable and to show people you are really trying to understand and help, as opposed to just talking about what you want to sell them. Which goodness knows we've all seen plenty of that in our email and in our social feeds and on the calls that come to our phones late at night.
Yeah. So on this topic of relationships and the trust gap,
Yep.
one of the things that we talk about a lot in professional services is this concept of thought leadership.
Yep.
And I think it's an overused word, even though it's a very important thing. And a lot of firms, for a lot of reasons, struggle to produce really meaningful content. And you and I have talked in the past about how research can support thought leadership. So I'm wondering if you can share just a little bit of your philosophy on research and expertise and thought leadership.
Yeah, we've actually done research into thought leadership and what people think it is and what they think the value is. First of all, nobody likes that term, so you're not alone. There really isn't a better one, but the reason people don't like it is because they've been duped before with someone who build themselves as a thought leader and is really just trying to sell from the stage or
Mhm,
from their podcast or whatever. So they don't really trust it. Um, what people expect in a true thought leader, they want somebody like them, um, being helpful, being consistently helpful. And believe it or not, as low a bar as that may be, that's a rare thing. It is
Mm,
differentiating. And I think especially now when, people can churn out all kinds of selling AI crap, the stuff that really differentiates you is when you really do know your stuff and you're not hiding it behind, a credit card form before
mhm,
people get to understand that about you. You are being generous with what you know. I tell clients to share what they know, not necessarily what they sell, but what they know. Because we also know from research that in B2B in particular, about 77% of the purchase decision has already been made before we even know someone's considering us, before they even show up to our website or attend one of our events or whatever. That most of the decision has been made. So we have to build trust before we know they're looking at us.
mm,
And this is where thought leadership is so powerful. It's you being out there, not asking for anything, but talking about what you know. And research gives you the opportunity to talk about a lot more than just what you sell, which I think is where people get stuck. I think
mhm,
mhm,
people think thought leadership is about how can we say more about what we want you to buy?
mhm,
That's not true thought leadership. True thought leadership is saying, this is what I've learned.
mm,
This is what I think about that, given all of the experience I have and the various examples. And this is what I advise people to do, given that information. That's the three-part approach that we recommend. You can take any data point, whether you've done original research or you found data in another study, like the Edison study that we just talked about. You can say, here is this data point. This is what I think about that, given what I do
mm,
and what my experience has been. This surprised me or this didn't surprise me. And given this piece of information, this is what I would tell my clients to do. This is what we're advising our audience to do based on that. And you don't have to pay me to get that advice.
mm,
It's here for you.
yeah,
Um, you know, ideally, you don't even have to give me an email to get that advice. People are very reticent these days because of the level of spam to even deliver something like that. So just be generous and be helpful. And what happens is that people go, I remember how helpful that person was. I remember that was a
mhm,
really insightful thing and that really gave me a leg up. And that's the person I'm going to go to when I need more advice for this. That's the person I'm going to hire when I need help. It builds trust. And honestly, prospects are just clients who haven't learned to trust us yet.
mhm.
That's all it is. So
okay,
for me, thought leadership is about building trust before they we even know they're there looking at us. Because then what happens is they come to you and say, I'm ready.
Right,
I'm ready to go. I've
right.
been listening to you.
right, mhm,
Your advice has been working. It makes sense to me. You're very generous about giving it. I'm in.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you guys have had that experience where
Yeah.
somebody's like, "Yeah, we're ready. When can we get started?"
Right.
It means a lot less selling,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right?
Well,
If
and
you do it right.
I think, Susan, for a lot of our clients, they're buying something from us that they don't buy very often, right?
And don't understand very well.
And don't understand
Mhm.
very well. Now, I
Right.
mean, I think as an architect, there's some of your customers, Carl, are your clients are folks that regularly are developing property and building buildings, and right,
Mhm.
you can build a long-term relationship with them. But if you're, doing K-12, that may be for that school superintendent or that school board who's making a decision about an architect. This may be the one and only time that they're involved in the construction and design of a new building.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think a lot of times thought leadership is building a relationship well in advance of them even having a need of any kind, but they're interested in what you're doing. The other thing that it strikes me as you talk about research and how it can be employed in thought leadership is it's one of the things that can help combat the challenge of AI slop. And
Law.
I think we have a question to get to about
Okay.
AI, but when we're talking about research, we're talking about something that's original, right? So much of what we see as thought leadership is regurgitation of things that I could have found by doing a Google search.
Mhm.
And while it's
Mhm.
great that you're demonstrating that you also have that knowledge that anybody could have found anywhere, um, you're not really adding anything to the equation. But when you're doing original research on whatever that topic is, it's information that your audience cannot find anywhere else. And it doesn't have to be, I don't think it has to move mountains. It doesn't have to be earth shattering. It has to be useful.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think you are 100% right. It has to be useful, but it doesn't necessarily have to be earth shattering in order for it to be valuable.
No, and I will tell you, I tell clients that it's important they remember that the research is not the thought leadership.
Mm, right. That's a good,
It's that
excellent point.
perspective and that advice
Yeah.
that is the
Mhm.
leadership. That's, the research gives you a platform to be visible, to have new data. People are interested in data.
Right.
But, inevitably, the next question is, okay, so what do I do?
Yep.
That's interesting, but what do I do? And this is
Mhm.
where that expertise comes into play. And I actually think, Jerry, going back to that conversation about, wow, if you're a newbie, you really want somebody who knows what they're doing. It also plays with folks who have a lot of expertise and experience because they want to work with an expert. They
Mhm.
want to know that whoever they're partnering with can meet their expectations.
Right.
Mhm.
So it just works across the spectrum to really know what you're doing. But how do people know you know what you're doing? It's not by, to your point, regurgitating stats. It's about interpreting information and
Yeah.
making it functional
Yeah.
to the benefit of the audience that you're speaking to.
Yeah.
So, sometimes I will have clients who will say, there's a ton of other firms that do what we do. And I just don't know that we're going to be that special or
Mhm.
that our research is going to find something that unique. And
Mhm.
my argument is always that, we don't know whether the research will find something unique. I believe that interesting data comes from asking interesting questions.
Mhm.
Um, so if you don't have interesting questions, you're probably not going to find anything interesting.
Yeah.
But even if you do ask interesting questions, there may not be some radical like aha moment in the data itself. But that doesn't mean that the magic can't still happen
Mhm.
based on your interpretation of that and your advice to people.
Mhm.
That's what can be absolutely,
Yeah.
mind blowing. We did, you probably remember, Jerry, we did the agency edge research this year, 2025. We do an annual study that I think we're on our 13th year now for marketing agencies, surveying agency clients. And this year we asked them about AI and what they expect of their agencies with respect to AI. And one of the most fascinating findings in that study to me was that the majority of clients do not want to fire their agencies. and replace them with AI, which I think has been sort of a popular bugaboo, a concern, right? Among
Mhm.
professional services in general. If you're a writer
Mhm.
or whatever, is AI going to
Yeah.
replace it for us? Well, the survey showed that, in fact, what clients want is for their agencies to guide and lead them with AI. Because even though clients know what they do very well, they don't know how it works with AI. They don't
Mm.
know a lot of this kind of stuff. And it's high risk. They can make a big mistake and damage the reputation of their firm. And when we presented that data to agencies, it was like a light bulb went on. And I have talked to probably 20 agencies in the last, I don't know, month or two
Mhm.
that are implementing new communication and messaging about how they are experts in AI and can help you avoid those kind of problems and use it effectively. That's working very, very well with their clients
Yeah.
because they found something that they didn't expect. They
Right.
understood something. And then all of the experts that are talking about that research that are really like Drew McClellan, right? Real experts in advising agencies are saying, okay, so here is what you need to do. Based on this data, here is what we recommend you do. And agencies all over the place are implementing that and it's helping,
Mhm.
right? So it's not just the data. The data by itself is just data, and maybe there's something interesting in there, but good luck finding it. The
Mhm.
real
Yeah.
value of thought leadership comes from you, the expert,
Yeah.
and your reflection on that. And that can be true of research you do yourself or research you find elsewhere. To your point, the benefit of research you do yourself is that nobody else has it.
Right. Yeah.
And if you do something like attitudinal segmentation, nobody else will have it. That's completely unique for you. You're not going to see one of your competitors that has
Mhm.
has something like that. And having a new view of things is really powerful and
Right.
Yeah.
effective and can lead to some really great advice and some really great outcomes
Yeah.
for your audience.
We still, at the end of the day, we still kind of talk about as humans that trusted advisor piece, right?
Yep.
It's like, yeah, yeah, you've got the knowledge, you've got the information, but at some point, I'm still wanting to feel that you're advising me and I trust you.
Yep.
And
Mhm.
building that trust goes back to a relationship, which there's hopefully the core of
Yeah,
things.
and I think AI is really magnifying the need for
Yeah.
thoughtful, expert perspective on things. Have you guys had prospects reach out to you yet that have found you through AI?
Yeah. We actually had our first client, or potential client right at this point, reach out to us when I asked them how they found us, and
Yeah,
it was using ChatGPT,
yeah.
and giving it
So
a
that
set of
happened to
criteria.
me too, right?
Yeah.
But what's elevating that is not a beautiful website.
No.
Not it is thoughtful deep content,
Mhm.
long form stuff that AI can use to say, "Hey, you need to look at this person."
Right.
AI is not neutral. AI says,
Mhm.
"Hey, I would really consider these 4 or 5 firms for what you're talking about." And this is how people are using it. And
Yep.
so if you can't sustain a decent length of conversation about something that's really important and helpful to your audience, your content is not going to exist or is not going to be very powerful if it does. And you
Yeah.
can do AI slop all day long,
Yeah.
right?
I
But
I
I think
love
experts perspective that's
right. I
really helpful. That's what people want.
right. I love that you're using the word perspective because it's something that we've been talking about a lot, with our clients. When you think about what your brand is about, it can be I think a lot of times we think about what we do and who we do it for or where we do
Yeah.
it, and that's sort of as far as a lot of firms get, and that's hard to differentiate, especially the larger the firm, the more different things you do for the more different audiences that you do them for, it really becomes difficult to separate yourself and your firm from everyone else, but that perspective, we like to talk about the way
Yeah.
that you think is
Yeah.
something that is should be unique to you. And I think there's something about the introspection that sometimes I think just trips us up. We're so focused on getting stuff done and delivering things, and how we do it, how we think about the work that we're doing is often it's either intuitive and innate, or it's just not something that is something that we think about very often.
It's so true. Part of our process when we start our research is all custom, as you know well. It starts from a blank page. And when we start that conversation with a client, one of the things I will ask them about is their point of view as an
Right.
organization.
Yeah.
Right way to go about this work. What's wrong? What makes them crazy? What do they rant about or whatever? And it's surprising to me how often they kind of do a double take and say, I'm not really sure
Yeah.
what our point of view is, or we haven't really thought about it that way. And this is the other thing that makes your ability as a thought leader to be extraordinarily unique is you're not just informed by your experience,
Right.
you are informed by your perspective, your point of view.
Right.
And, we have had two clients both working in the same industry that had research that took it in, original research that was different for both of them. And they feel very differently about what they are advising their
Hmm.
clients to do based on their particular research. And, we see it with the agency research we do. You ask two different experts and they're going to have different perspectives, which is great.
Right.
One of the things that is really happening with AI already, and I fear will continue to, is this sort of genericism loop where AI learns from what you put out and you put out what AI learns from. And all of a sudden, everything looks the same and it's
Right.
extraordinarily generic. And the opportunity to insert new ideas, crazy ideas, bold perspectives, and to learn about things from our buyers that may not fit into the typical mold is a great opportunity to break away from what looks the same and sounds the same that everybody else is talking about.
I think it's part of how we find connection with the right kind of client for us. And I think
Mm,
one of the things that we get hung up on in professional services is providing the right answer, particularly architects, engineers, lawyers, doctors, anything that you get certified, board examined, what have you, that your license is on the line. I mean, marketers, we don't have licenses, right? Who needs licenses? We just do whatever we're going to do. But if you're
right.
an engineer or you're an architect or a lawyer or a doctor, you have a license on the line. So the facts matter. And
Mhm.
the kind of problem that you're solving can often be incredibly thorny, right? And so the precision with which you can come up with the correct answer for how deep you need to drill or this or that or the other thing is is incredibly important. And at a certain level, it separates, really good firms from, lackluster ones. But when you start competing with all the other really good firms, it the perspective thing is what starts to come into play because now there's nuance, right? There's nuance about how do you achieve the correct answer, and
Right.
you can do it with a high degree of conservatism in your approach. You can, think about taxes, right?
Mhm.
You can be incredibly conservative about what you deduct or how you approach protecting your assets, or you can be very, very risky to the point of being illegal. And when you're choosing who your tax accountant is going to be and your tax advisor is going to be, it's, super important that you are on the same page in terms of their perspective about how to deal with these fuzzy questions. And that I think
Well,
that's the perspective thing.
Well, sure, and there's not necessarily one right approach. My dad was a plastic surgeon, and I could tell you he had very strong opinions about the right way to approach specific types of surgeries. And we've actually done research with Craig Cody, who's my
Right.
CPA. You know Craig as well.
Yep.
Um, and Craig is a former NYPD cop who's a CPA now, and he has a sizable group of people who want to make sure that nothing he advises them to do goes over the line,
Right.
as close to the line as you can get to save money, but not over the line. And they believe that Craig won't let them do that. And
Right.
and that's an important characteristic
Right.
of him because that's his point of view with respect to taxes. Um, but yeah, the point of view thing is really important. And again, when you think of trusted advisors, like you were saying, Carl, the important words there are trusted and advisor. You are not neutral in the relationship.
Right.
You have advice to give. That's what they want. That's what they're paying for, right? Otherwise, a machine could do it all day long if there were really no options and there was only one optimal answer. And it's really, what's important to you? What do you prioritize most? What are the challenges that are going to be difficult for you to achieve what you're trying to achieve? And that point of view about how to navigate all that is incredibly important. So, every once in a while, I'll have somebody come in and say, well, I'm just afraid that, I'm not as smart as I think I am. I don't have as much to offer. And research is going to show that. And I'm like, research will not show that because
Mhm.
you are unique. You will have a perspective on every single thing we find. And that's you. And that's great. And then, people will reject you for that. And they will also select you for that. But it'll be the right people selecting you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's interesting. We're in kind of the Wild West these days with information, aren't we? And how prevalent it is and how much of it there is at our fingertips.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But I think that, you know, being trusted is more important than it ever was. Being
Mm.
authentic is more important than it ever was. And we have to keep that in mind as experts and be and appear as trustworthy, appear as authentic, appear as helpful. And that in itself has become a differentiator.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's a really great place to kind of bring this home. Susan, if there's one key takeaway that you would leave with our audience from our conversation today, what would it be?
Um, Again, trust is the number one thing that we have to build, and we have to build it from below the baseline. I'm not sure if I trust you or not, right?
Mm.
Um, Having data builds trust.
Hmm.
And everyone can have data. You do not have to do a custom research project to incorporate data into your thought leadership. You can find data out there because remember, it's only one part of the equation of what you're providing as a thought leader. The other parts are your perspective and expertise and your
Mhm.
advice.
Hmm.
So think about how you can get some data into what you're talking about, even if it's coming from somebody else's research that's been published, or if you're doing some, research on your own. It doesn't have to be fancy. But trust is the number one thing we need to be building. We need it to keep clients. We need it to get clients to spend more with us year over year, and we need it to build a pipeline to maintain. So if I have one initiative, that's what it would be. And I agree with you. Thought leadership is a great way to do that if you do it right. And research is a great way to support that thought leadership. So you can plan out, a year of content that's really meaningful and focused on what you want to be talking about. That makes life easier.
Yeah.
But that's the goal in my
That's it.
mind.
All
Yep.
right. Well, that's a great point. So thank you for that. As we wrap up, I'd be curious to ask you one more question that we like to ask our guests, and that is sort of like, what are you doing these days? Like, is there a book or is there a podcast that you think would be really helpful or you recommend to our audience?
Yeah, I'm really fascinated. So my friend Neen James,
Mm.
she's a speaker, she's a consultant. She works in the luxury environment and she advises luxury brands about how to reach their customers. We did research with Neen last year and she's written a book that's in pre-sale right now called Exceptional Experiences.
Hmm.
And it is about how you can give your prospects and your clients the feeling of experiencing luxury in their work with you, with even if you're not in a luxury category, even if you're
Okay.
selling ladders, you can give them this feeling of really treating them in a luxury way that really builds trust, it builds alliance, it builds word of mouth. It's a fascinating book. And I'm just super excited to be out in the world. I was an early reader on it, and it's really wonderful. It's got me thinking in a lot of ways about how to add that to our client experience and our prospect experience to really make them feel like they're getting an elevated level of customer service from us. So,
Okay.
really interesting reading.
Well, because it takes me twice for most things. Which would the name of that book again, just to make sure I got it?
It's called Exceptional Experiences.
Perfect.
It's by Neen James, Neen. James, James, and her website is neenjames.com, and you can just go on there and pre-order it or whatever. But
Awesome.
it's a really interesting. It's got me really thinking right now.
Cool. Well, I've got some homework now. So thanks.
Okay, good.
That's awesome. And we'll definitely put that in the show notes as well. And
Yeah, I think anybody dealing with clients, which is all of us,
yeah,
it's a very worthy read in terms of getting some perspective, even if you're working in sort of I'm working with an iron foundry right now, which doesn't
huh.
sound like a luxury environment, but there is the opportunity for them to make their customers and their prospects feel like it is, which is pretty cool. It's a really new perspective. I don't always come across that when I'm reading, something that really makes me think.
Okay.
It's our word of the day, perspective.
Yes.
Susan, where can our listeners find you online or learn more about your work at Audience Audit?
Audienceaudit.com is the website. I hate social media these days, don't you? I mean, I'm technically present, but it just seems like it's so sloppy. But there's a lot of information on audienceaudit.com. We publish our research every year. If any of your listeners are an agency, we're publishing research every year for agencies. But you'll see what we do and who we do it for. And my email, susan@audienceaudit.com, is where to reach me if you have any questions or just want to have a chat about what you're thinking about when it comes to thought leadership or research.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
Well, that wraps up another episode of The Intangible Brand. If you found value in today's conversation as much as I know I did, please take a moment to follow us or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Your support definitely is helping us continue to bring you these kinds of discussions.
And if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. It's also another way in which others can discover the show and join our community.
And we'd love your perspective, since that's the word of the day, on today's episode or any episode. So feel free to leave a review or share your feedback with us. Tell us what you liked or what you'd like to hear next. You can reach us at hello@theintangible.brand.com.
And you can also connect with us on LinkedIn or visit our website at theintangible.brand.com for more resources and information about the show.
Thank you again for joining us on The Intangible Brand. And remember, the strongest brands are built on the experiences that they create, both for their clients and for their teams.